Welcome to Uncloseted Conversations. Even if you stumbled upon this channel by accident, you are welcome here. The stories here are from my heart, from my soul, from my pen to your ears. I hope that you will stay a little longer and open yourself to the magic of storytelling. Here I write fiction, and though not always aligning with reality, it still tugs at heartstrings. Stories are escapes and sometimes a balm to the soul. So, enjoy your time here, and if reality presses down too loud and too hard, come knock at the door, come in, take a seat, grab a coffee, and just exhale. These are veil-bound stories, and the space is free and non-judgmental. Sit back, earphones or pods in, and let's listen to another exquisite romance. In the shadows of London, a serial killer leaves messages no one can read, except the ones who follow the code. Ashkan Kevranian, a meticulous forensic analyst, is pulled into a deadly game of precision and pattern. Shaylee Sutton, a reclusive financial genius, holds the key to unraveling it all, but her world is built on solitude, walls no one has ever breached. When their paths collide in a storm of danger, intellect, and unspoken desire, the code becomes more than just a puzzle, it becomes a language of the heart. Together, they must decode the killer's mind, navigate a labyrinth of trust and temptation, and confront the vulnerability they've long denied. In a world where every clue could be a threat, every touch could ignite something forbidden, and every heartbeat counts, they discover that some patterns are meant to be followed together. Two hearts, one pattern, a love no danger can break. Whispers and code. Two hearts, one pattern, a love no danger can break. Chapter 1. Unusual Crime. Armenian forensic analyst Ashkan Kevranian moved to London because her career in Armenia had stalled. Good work, no momentum, too many ceilings pressing down. London offered space, challenge, and teeth. She found a studio apartment in a quiet pocket of the city and secured a post with the Ministry of Defense, where the work was brutal, precise, and never boring. Her phone buzzed against the desk. New case. Public figure. High risk. Requested specifically. Ashkan inhaled slowly and lowered her head, eyes closing for a single, deliberate beat. She had just come off a messy scene, young teenager, brutally murdered. The third this week. Violence was escalating, and London was beginning to twitch. She pushed herself out of the chair and swung the strap of her forensic kit over her shoulder. The door to her office opened. Her assistant, Mark, leaned against the frame, a wry smile playing at his mouth. "This one's high stakes," he said. "Political connections. You ready?" Ashkan nodded and strode past him. The driver was waiting in the garage. No small talk. No wasted minutes. The crime scene was public, deliberately so. Not hidden in an alley, not tucked inside a home or park. The location itself was a declaration. They pulled up outside the courthouse to chaos. Media swarmed the steps. Cameras flashed. Police lines strained against the weight of the crowd, grief and curiosity bleeding into one another. Ashkan stepped out and stopped. Her gaze snagged on something in the bin beside the courthouse doors. She dropped her case. Surgical gloves snapped onto her hands as she crouched. Mark was already beside her, evidence bag open. She pulled a plastic needle cap from the bin and sealed it. "How did you see that?" Mark asked. "A surgical needle cap doesn't belong in a bin on courthouse steps," she replied calmly. Mark nodded, taking the bag. Ashkan rose, scanning the crowd, faces etched with shock, horror, and fascination. Then she turned and followed him inside. The main courtroom stole the air from her lungs. A man hung from the ceiling, bound to the heavy wooden battens overhead. Naked, save for a cloth draped at his waist. His eyes were blindfolded with red silk. His arms were propped outward with wooden supports. In his hands, scales. "Symbolic how," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Mark smirked as he pulled plastic over his shoes and handed her a pair. Ashkan didn't put them on yet. She lifted the camera at her neck. Click after click, angles, details, shadows. She kept moving backward until her spine met the first row of chairs. Then she stopped. Ashkan Kevranian missed nothing. Her colleagues used to place bets on how fast she'd solve a case or uncover the detail everyone else overlooked. Her eye for precision bordered on frightening. And this scene? This wasn't murder. It was theater. Chapter 2: The Coding Introvert. Shaylee Sutton, financial analyst at Vortexcoms, snapped her laptop shut with a frustrated sigh. Jesus, why can't you just fucking stop? She muttered into the darkened office. At 10 o'clock at night, the only inhabitants left were servers, shadows, and Shaylee Sutton. She shoved the laptop into her bag, grabbed her keys, and headed out. The floor hummed with machinery and the distant whine of a vacuum cleaner somewhere far away. The elevator descended in silence. She scrolled through her phone. And then she saw it. A man hanging from the ceiling of a courthouse. No name. No context. No explanation. Fuck, she whispered as she stepped out. That's a statement. She unlocked her Jeep and tossed the bag onto the passenger seat before sliding behind the wheel. The drive back to her studio apartment in Cambridge was stitched together with her carefully curated playlist: dark rock, deep indie pop, songs that understood silence. She parked, lingered for a moment, then climbed out. Shaylee Sutton was an introvert to her bones. Always dressed in black. Combat boots. No parties. No crowds. No social obligations. The fewer people, the better. Numbers didn't disappoint. Code didn't betray. That's where she thrived. Inside, keys landed in the bowl by the door. Boots were kicked off. She padded into the kitchen in socks and poured a glass of water. The quiet wrapped around her. Outside, Cambridge settled into its nocturnal rhythm. Blinking lights, distant vibrations, the city breathing without asking permission. Shay leaned against the window, watching the dark. This was her peace. Her aphrodisiac. A rare smile tugged at her lips as she slipped out of her leather jacket. A quiet night of coding. Maybe a horror movie. Shaylee Sutton had one weakness she guarded fiercely: old vinyl records. She'd drive across cities to hunt them down, buying them without apology, despite owning no record player. Madison always teased her about it. Why don't you just buy a player? It's not necessary, Shay would shrug. Across London, a raven-haired woman crouched over a lab table, surrounded by evidence from the courthouse murder. Ashkan Kevranian worked with surgical devotion. By morning, she'd have a preliminary report. That was how she lived. One crime scene bleeding into the next. And she loved every second of it. Chapter 3: Uninvited Collusion. Morning traffic in Cambridge was a carefully choreographed disaster, and Shaylee Sutton despised it with religious intensity. Somewhere ahead, another driver was losing patience just as spectacularly. Ashkan Kevranian flicked on her indicator and muscled her Mustang through a congested intersection, only to curse as a black Jeep barely missed her front bumper. Jesus, can you not drive? Shay slammed on the brakes as the Mustang cut in front of her without ceremony. What the fuck, she snapped. I had the right of way. Every curse showed plainly on her face as the Mustang slid to a stop. The driver stepped out. Heels clicked sharply against the pavement. Oh, for fuck's sake, Shay sighed. Ashkan reached the Jeep, storm gray eyes blazing, then caught her reflection in the tinted window. Her hand lifted to knock. The glass slid down. Her breath hitched. The woman behind the wheel was distracting. Beautiful in a way that unsettled the senses. Ashkan masked it instantly, forcing anger back into place. Did you not see me? She demanded, her voice softer than intended. Shay watched her without expression. Silent. Still. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened almost imperceptibly. What do you have to say for yourself? Ashkan pressed. Nothing. I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you. Finally, a reply, dry as bone. And I'm trying to avoid it. The words landed like a slap. Ashkan's jaw tightened. She turned sharply and strode back to her car. Shay watched her go, irritation simmering beneath the surface. Uninvited. Unnecessary. And somehow, unforgettable. Chapter 4: Arithmetic of Sin. Ashkan stood alone in the lab, the city still half asleep outside reinforced glass. Evidence lay arranged with ritual precision: photographs, fiber samples, the red silk blindfold sealed in plastic, the scales catalogued and tagged. Justice. balance, punishment. Symbolism was never accidental. It was confession wearing gloves. She turned to the screens lining the wall. Time of death. Entry points. Trace chemicals. Needle cap, medical grade, sterile, precise. Someone methodical. Someone disciplined. Someone who planned. Ashken frowned. Show me the finances, she said quietly. Mark looked up from his tablet. Financials. Public figure, she replied. No such thing as a clean life at that level. Money always leaks. Minutes later, data flooded the screen: donations, shell companies, obscure trusts, charitable foundations that smelled like absolution laundering. Ashken's eyes narrowed, tracking patterns instinctively. Then she froze. Stop, she said. Mark paused the scroll. What? She stepped closer, pulse ticking faster. That transaction, repeat it. A series of microtransfers. Insignificant alone. Invisible to anyone not looking exactly right. But together, they formed a rhythm. Dates aligned with lunar cycles. Amounts mirrored court statutes. Transfers routed through accounts named after classical virtues: Veritas, Ikitas, Nemesis. Ashken swallowed. This isn't laundering, she said slowly. It's composition. Mark blinked. Composition of what? Poetry, she answered. Financial poetry. The room went quiet. The killer wasn't just staging bodies. They were writing. Each murder a stanza. Each transaction a syllable. Justice calculated to the decimal. This is sophisticated, Ashken murmured. Too sophisticated for instinct alone. She leaned back, arms crossing, mind racing. This wasn't just forensic territory. This was language. Code masquerading as currency. Someone cleared their throat behind her. You're going to need help. Ashken turned to find Director Hale standing in the doorway, expression grim. I know, she said flatly. Not a profiler, he continued. Not a criminologist. You need someone who understands markets the way you understand bodies. Someone who sees numbers the way you see blood spatter. Ashken exhaled slowly. A financial analyst. And code, Hale added. Someone who can read between transactions. Ashken's jaw tightened. Fine, she said. But I don't want a suit who thinks Excel is foreplay. Hale's mouth twitched. Funny you should say that. Across Cambridge, Shaylee Sutton stared at her screen, spine straightening. The anomaly shouldn't exist. And yet it did. A pattern buried inside benign data. Transfers too elegant to be random. Numbers that echoed. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. This is poetry, she whispered. And somewhere in London, Ashken Kevranian said the exact same words. At the exact same moment. Without knowing, the woman who would soon disrupt her life had just answered the killer's call. Chapter 5: Controlled Detonation. Shaylee Sutton hated government buildings. Too much glass pretending to be transparent. Too many people pretending to be competent. She signed in without comment, black coat still on, combat boots echoing down the corridor as she followed the escort. She hadn't asked why she was summoned. She already knew. When numbers whisper, someone eventually listens. The lab doors slid open. Ashken Kevranian didn't look up immediately. She was studying a projection wall dense with financial data, posture immaculate, attention lethal. Raven hair tied back, sleeves rolled just enough to be dangerous. Shay stopped short. Oh, that was inconvenient. Miss Sutton, Mark said, gesturing. This is. I know who she is, Shay interrupted flatly, eyes never leaving Ashken. Forensic analyst. Ministry of Defense. You're the one who decided the killer writes in decimals. Ashken turned. And the room shifted. Shay felt it first, the snap of tension, the invisible tightening of air. Storm gray eyes assessed her with clinical precision, cataloging, measuring, dissecting. No warmth. No apology. Do you always interrupt introductions? Ashken asked coolly, or only when you're trying to establish dominance? Shay arched a brow. Do you always glare like you're about to perform an autopsy, or am I special? Mark audibly inhaled. Ashken gestured sharply to the screen. You were brought here because you understand financial code. Not because you're charming. Good, Shay said. I left charming at home. She stepped forward, eyes flicking to the data, and then she froze. Her irritation dissolved into focus. "Oh," she murmured. "You missed it." Ashkin's jaw tightened. "Excuse me." Shay ignored her, already moving, fingers flying across the keyboard with surgical certainty. The projection shifted, layers peeled back, transactions reordered. "There," Shay said. "That sequence." Ashkin stepped closer despite herself. Too close. She caught the faint scent of leather and something darker, ozone, maybe. She ignored it. "That's just routing noise," Ashkin said. "No," Shay replied calmly. "That's a caesura." Ashkin blinked. "A what?" "A pause," Shay said. "In poetry. He breaks the flow here to draw attention to what comes next." She typed again. The numbers rearranged. Dates aligned. Amounts converted. Accounts mirrored. Words emerged. Ashkin's breath stilled. "Weigh them. Before they bleed. The balance must hold." Silence slammed into the room. Ashkin felt it, a visceral pull, like gravity recalibrating around this woman. Shay hadn't just cracked the code. She'd heard it. That stanza wasn't about the courthouse victim, Shay continued, voice steady. "It's a preface. He's telling you the method." Ashkin forced herself to straighten, schooling her face into neutrality. Calm. Detached. Professional. "What method?" she asked. Shay turned to her then, really looked at her. Dark eyes sharp, curious, utterly unimpressed. "He chooses victims whose financial sins outweigh their public virtue," she said. "He balances their lives like ledgers. And when the scales tip, murder becomes accounting." Ashkin finished quietly. "Yes," Shay said. "And you're already behind." Ashkin felt the impact like a blow, and worse, admiration surged beneath it. Dangerous. Unwelcome. She locked it down immediately, burying it under steel and protocol. "Can you predict the next stanza?" Ashkin asked evenly. Shay's lips curved, not a smile. "A challenge." "I already did." She pulled up a final data stream. A single account. Dormant. Waiting. Ashkin stared at it, pulse accelerating. "Then you're not leaving," she said coolly. "You're consulting." Shay shrugged. "Figures. You people never ask." Ashkin met her gaze, expression unreadable. "Get used to it," she said. "This killer doesn't miss." "And neither do I." Shay held her stare for a beat too long. "Good," she replied. "Because I don't play well with amateurs." Electric. Unavoidable. And neither woman noticed the killer had just found new witnesses. Chapter 6. Residual Impact. The building changed at night. Government offices always did, less arrogance, more honesty. The fluorescent lights softened, corridors emptied, and the air carried that particular fatigue that made truths careless. Ashkin stood at the coffee machine, staring at the stream like it might confess something. Midnight bled quietly into morning. She hadn't gone home. Neither had Shay. Behind her, keys tapped. Fast. Precise. Relentless. "You grind your teeth when you're thinking," Shay said without looking up. Ashkin stiffened. "I do not." "You do," Shay replied. "Right before you're about to pretend you're not impressed." Ashkin turned slowly, expression perfectly neutral. "Focus on the data, Ms. Sutton." Shay glanced up then and froze. It hit them at the same time. The curve of recognition. The memory snapping into place like a seatbelt pulled too late. Black Jeep. Silver Mustang. Anger. Heat. The almost. "Oh," Shay said flatly. "You." Ashkin felt it low in her chest, sharp and inconvenient. She buried it instantly. "This is not relevant." Shay laughed softly. "You cut me off in traffic this morning. You were speeding. I had the right of way. You hesitated." Shay leaned back in her chair, studying her now. "You stormed up to my window like you were going to arrest me." Ashkin folded her arms. "You were infuriatingly uncooperative." "That's my charm." Silence stretched, but it wasn't hostile. Not anymore. It was charged. Awareness sliding beneath professionalism like a blade under skin. Ashkin turned away first. "Always control the exit." "We're not here to reminisce," she said. The killer sent another message. Shay was instantly upright. "What kind?" Ashkin tapped the screen. A new transaction string pulsed faintly, fresh, deliberate, arrogant. Shay's eyes lit, not with fear, but fascination. "He's escalating," she murmured. Less subtle now. He wants us to read it. Her fingers flew. Ashken watched despite herself. The way Shay leaned into the work. The way her focus narrowed until the rest of the world ceased to exist. It was beautiful in a dangerous, razor-clean way. Numbers rearranged. Amounts converted into primes. Timestamps mapped to judicial rulings. Accounts named after Greek muses. Then, there it was. Another stanza. 2 saw the scales. 1 counts the blood. 1 counts the cost. Balance requires both. Ashken's breath went shallow. He knows, she said quietly. Shay nodded. He's watching the response time. The way the code shifts when it's noticed. She paused. And he remembers. Remembers what? Shay finally looked at her. Really looked. The near collision, she said. Chaos narrowly avoided. Energy displaced, but not resolved. Ashken's jaw tightened. You're anthropomorphizing a killer. No, Shay replied calmly. I'm recognizing a pattern. He engineers moments that almost become disasters. He thrives on the tension between outcome and restraint. Ashken stepped closer to the screen and to Shay, without realizing it. Her reflection ghosted in the glass beside Shay's, their proximity undeniable. And the victims? Ashken asked. Men who escaped consequences, Shay said. Financial predators with public halos. He doesn't kill them immediately. He weighs them. Tests the balance. And when it fails? Shay's voice dropped. Execution. Ashken swallowed. She felt it again, that pull. That unwanted admiration. Shay wasn't just brilliant. She was dangerous in a way Ashken understood instinctively. She locked it down. No tells. No softness. No mistake. You'll stay, Ashken said coolly. Overnight. We move together now. Shay smirked. Was that an order? Yes. Careful, Shay said, eyes glinting. You already tried that once, with your car. Ashken held her gaze, unflinching. And you're still standing. So are you. The killer's next transaction landed. Both women turned toward the screen at the same time. Perfectly in sync. And somewhere in the city, a murderer smiled. Because balance, at last, was forming. Chapter 7. Split Ledger. The first message arrived at 2:17. Ashken saw it before the alert sounded. A transfer, clean, elegant, infuriatingly polite, slipped into a dormant account she'd flagged hours earlier. No rush. No panic. Just confidence. She felt the familiar tightening behind her ribs. Shay, she said evenly. We have another. Shay was already frowning at her own screen. So do I. They looked at each other. Not relief. Not triumph. Suspicion. Show me yours, Shay said. Ashken hesitated, a fraction too long. Shay noticed. That alone was a fissure. Ashken turned her screen anyway. The numbers shifted, rearranged themselves with theatrical patience, then resolved into text. The body tells the truth. But the truth is never whole. Trust the cut, not the count. Ashken felt the words like a hand on her throat. He's undermining methodology, she said calmly. Classic manipulation. Trying to pull focus back to the physical. Shay didn't answer. She turned her laptop slightly, shielding it with her arm. Ashken clocked it immediately. Let me see yours. No, Shay said. The word was soft. Absolute. Ashken's eyes sharpened. This is not optional. Shay exhaled slowly, fingers drumming once on the desk. And this, she said, is exactly why he split the message. Ashken didn't move. Show me. Shay met her gaze, dark eyes steady, unreadable. Then she turned the screen. Ashken felt the impact like a blow to the sternum. Numbers don't lie. People do. She will choose her science. You should choose yourself. Silence fell hard. Ashken straightened, spine rigid, face a study in control. No reaction. No crack. Inside, something twisted, sharp, and unwelcome. He's profiling us, she said coolly. Trying to provoke distrust. Shay watched her closely. Too closely. Is he wrong? Shay asked. Ashken turned to her. Yes. No hesitation. No warmth. Just certainty sharpened into steel. Shay searched her face for something, anything human slipping through the seams. Nothing. Funny, Shay said quietly. Because he sent me something else too. Ashkin's jaw tightened. There was more. Shay nodded once. A private ledger. Years of financial movement, offshore shells, ghost charities. Some of your courthouse victims' money ends up funding forensic tech contracts. The words landed with surgical precision. Ashkin felt the chill bloom low and slow. You think I didn't see that? She asked. I think, Shay said carefully, that you saw it and decided it didn't matter. Ashkin stepped closer. Too close. Her voice dropped, controlled but lethal. I decide what matters. And that, Shay replied, unflinching, is exactly what he's testing. The room vibrated with it now, unsaid things pressing against bone. The almost crash. The late night. The sink they hadn't named. Ashkin forced herself to step back. Professional distance. Always. This killer is attempting to fracture our collaboration, she said. We do not indulge it. Shay closed her laptop with a decisive click. Then don't ask me to pretend I didn't notice you choosing silence. Ashkin felt it then, the smallest fracture in her control. Not visible, but real. You think I'd protect a system that allows this? Ashkin asked quietly. I think, Shay said, voice low, that you're very good at surviving inside broken ones. The next alert chimed. Simultaneous. Both screens lit up. A final stanza split across two accounts, incomplete unless read together. Ashkin's half. Balance fails. When trust is weighed. Shay's half. And loyalty is priced. They stared at the screens. Then at each other. The killer wasn't asking a question anymore. He was placing a bet. And somewhere in London, a meticulous hand adjusted the scales. Because the most elegant way to test loyalty is to make both answers feel like betrayal. Chapter 8. Breach of Procedure. The alert didn't come through the official channels. That alone was the violation. Ashkin felt it before she understood it, her instincts flaring, spine going rigid as a secondary screen flickered to life. A transfer had landed in a non-monitored sandbox account. One only a handful of analysts even knew existed. One Shay had mentioned in passing. Her pulse kicked. Shay, Ashkin said sharply. Step away from your workstation. Shay didn't. Her eyes were locked on the code unfurling across her screen, breath shallow, shoulders drawn inward like the world had suddenly become too loud. He didn't use the ledger, Shay murmured. He used me. Ashkin was already moving, calling up security protocols, fingers flying. This channel isn't authorized. If this is a direct line, we shut it down and… No, Shay's voice cut through the room. Not loud. Absolute. Ashkin froze. Protocol screamed in her head. Cut access. Isolate. Contain. That was the rule. That was survival. But Shay looked cornered. He's baiting you, Ashkin said, forcing her tone into something steady. We bring in Cyber Command. We document. And lose him, Shay replied. And he knows it. The message finished rendering. Shay's screen resolved first. The introvert hides. Behind walls of silence. Tonight. She chooses. Ashkin's stomach dropped. What does he want? Ashkin asked quietly. Shay swallowed. Proof. Of what? That I'm not just your tool. The next transaction hit, larger, louder, reckless. A location tag embedded deep in the code. Ashkin's training snapped into place. We cannot act on unverified data. Shay turned to her then, eyes sharp but vulnerable in a way Ashkin hadn't seen yet. You already know it's real. Ashkin did. And that was the problem. If we move without clearance, they'll pull me, Shay said. Classify me as compromised. I disappear back into a box with a keyboard and no voice. Ashkin's jaw clenched. Protocol or person? Procedure or trust? She made the decision in less than a second. She killed the internal feed. Every screen in the room went dark except Shay's. Mark's voice crackled through comms. Ashkin? What the hell did you just do? Ashkin didn't answer. She grabbed her coat. We're going. Shay stared at her. You just violated 3 protocols and a national security directive, Ashkin said calmly. Move. You don't even know where this leads. Ashkin met her gaze, storm gray steady. I know who I'm choosing. They were out the door before security could react. The night swallowed them cold, loud, too close. Shay flinched instinctively at the exposure, hands curling into the sleeves of her coat. Ashkin clocked it instantly. She slowed her pace. Shielded without touching. The location led them to a derelict financial office, dark glass, dead servers, the ghost of power humming in the walls. Inside, Shay's breath hitched. "I don't do field work," she whispered. "I know," Ashkin replied. "Stay behind me." Shay hesitated, then nodded once. Trust, small, terrifying, real. They reached the terminal. One final message blinked to life. She broke the rules. For you. Balance shifts. Ashkin felt heat bloom under her skin and crushed it instantly. Shay read it too. "You chose me," Shay said quietly. Ashkin didn't look at her. "I chose the case." Shay's mouth twitched, not believing her for a second. Somewhere, the killer adjusted the scales again. Because tonight, loyalty had a weight. And Ashkin Kevranian had just placed it on the table. Chapter 9, Cost of Imbalance. The punishment arrived before dawn. Not loud. Not bloody. Not yet. Ashkin knew something was wrong the moment she stepped back into the building. The air felt altered, too still, like a room holding its breath after a lie. Shay hovered close behind her, shoulders tight, eyes scanning exits on instinct she didn't know she had. "That wasn't here before," Shay murmured. Ashkin followed her gaze. A new screen had been activated in the lab. Unauthorized. Unmarked. Waiting. Ashkin's pulse slowed, the calm that always preceded impact. "Don't touch anything." Shay ignored her. Of course she did. The screen bloomed to life at Shay's approach, code unfolding like silk pulled through rings. A single account number. Ashkin recognized it instantly. Her chest tightened. "No," she said quietly. "That's internal." "That's personal," Shay corrected, already moving. "It's yours." The killer hadn't attacked Shay. He'd gone for structure. The account was old. Buried deep. Established years ago, when Ashkin first arrived in London, an emergency fund routed through layers of compliance, funding her work, her mobility, her silence. Now it was unraveling. Transfers reversing. Flags triggering. Audits spawning like bacteria. And then the text appeared. "You broke the rule. I balanced the book. Your foundation is overdue." Ashkin's jaw locked. "This is retaliation," she said evenly. "He's collapsing my credibility." Shay's fingers hovered, then stilled. "He's not just collapsing it. He's reassigning blame." A second layer surfaced. Ashkin's name, threaded through procurement contracts, research funding, equipment approvals. Innocent on their own. Together, they told a story. A false one. Shay's voice dropped. "He's framing you for financial manipulation." Ashkin closed her eyes for half a second. That was all she allowed herself. "This ends my career," she said calmly. "If it sticks." Shay turned to her, sharp panic flashing across her controlled exterior. "You saved me. This is because of me." "No," Ashkin said immediately. Too quickly. "This is because he doesn't tolerate imbalance." The screen flickered again. Another stanza. "She chose you. So I chose her. Balance is mercy. Punishment is precision." Shay's breath stuttered. "He's telling us this isn't the final cost," Shay whispered. "It's leverage." Ashkin felt it then, not fear, but something colder. Resolve. "He wants you to walk away," Ashkin said. "If you do, the audits stop. The narrative collapses." Shay stared at the screen. At the numbers. At the trap. "And if I don't?" Ashkin met her eyes. Storm gray, unwavering. "Then he escalates," she said. Publicly. Shay laughed softly once. No humor in it. "He thinks I'll retreat because things get loud." Ashkin watched her carefully now. The recluse. The introvert. The woman who hid behind silence because the world demanded too much. "This is where you leave," Ashkin said quietly. "You owe me nothing." Shay stepped closer instead. "That's the problem," she said. "I don't owe you anything. I'm staying anyway." Ashkin felt it, sharp, dangerous, undeniable. She turned away before it could show. "Then listen carefully," Ashkin said. "If you stay, you follow my lead." Shay's lips curved faintly. "You already broke protocol for me." Ashkin paused. Then, without looking at her, "Don't make me regret it." The final message appeared. Next entry. Requires a body. The room went silent. The punishment was complete. Not blood. Not yet. The scales had shifted again. And now the killer wasn't just testing loyalty. He was charging interest. Chapter 10. The Quiet Counterstrike. Shaylee Sutton didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace. Didn't swear. Didn't ask permission. She sat. That alone should have warned the room. Ashkin watched from a measured distance as Shay slid back into her chair, shoulders settling, breath slowing. The panic receded not because the danger was gone, but because Shay had found something better than safety. Focus. Lock the door, Shay said softly. Ashkin did it without question. The killer's ledger still glowed on the unauthorized screen, Ashkin's name threaded through lies, the threat hanging in the air like a held knife. Shay's fingers moved. She didn't attack the code head-on. That would have been crude. Predictable. Exactly what he expected. Instead, she built walls. Invisible ones. Firewalls layered like misdirection, false vulnerabilities, decoy access points, honey traps dressed as weak security. She rerouted the killer's access through abandoned academic servers, obsolete banking nodes, forgotten infrastructure buried beneath decades of financial sediment. Ashkin watched, transfixed despite herself. You're not blocking him, Ashkin said quietly. No, Shay replied. I'm making him wander. The killer's signal jittered. Latency bloomed. Packets fractured. Transactions staggered like a drunk losing rhythm. For the first time, the killer hesitated. Shay tilted her head slightly, listening not with her ears, but with pattern recognition honed by years of solitude. There, she murmured. That pause? That's irritation. Ashkin felt a flicker of something dangerous and bright. Admiration. She buried it instantly. Shay typed again, this time slicing through the noise she'd created. She wasn't chasing him. She was letting him reveal himself by how he corrected his mistakes. The ledger twitched. A transaction rerouted too cleanly. Too instinctively. Got you, Shay whispered. Ashkin stepped closer. What did you find? Preference, Shay said. He favors institutions that believe they're untouchable. Courts. Banks. Charities with moral branding. She pulled a thread. The system resisted. Shay smiled, small, private, lethal. Resistance confirms it. The data collapsed inward, resolving into a single pathway. A name surfaced. Ashkin's stomach tightened. No, she breathed. A senior trustee. Publicly spotless. Privately weighted. A man who sat on ethics panels and laundered consequence through committees and silence. He's next, Shay said. No drama. Just certainty. He's already been weighed. The screen flashed. A new stanza forced its way through the labyrinth Shay had built, garbled, distorted, furious. You shifted the ground. But balance finds a way. One still falls. Shay leaned back, exhaling slowly. You made him stumble, Ashkin said. I made him visible, Shay corrected. Ashkin looked at her then really looked. The introvert who hated crowds. The woman who hid in numbers because the world was too loud. And yet here she was. Standing between a killer and the scales. You just saved my career, Ashkin said quietly. Shay shrugged, eyes still on the screen. I don't like bullies. Or bad accounting. Ashkin felt it again, that pull. That dangerous heat beneath discipline. She said nothing. Couldn't. The killer's signal thrashed once more, then vanished. Gone. For now. But they had his next move. And for the first time since this began, the scales weren't tilted in his favor. Ashkin broke the silence. We move before he does. Shay nodded once. Together. Unspoken. Unquestioned. And somewhere in the dark, a meticulous mind recalculated. Because the quiet one had just changed the equation. Chapter 11. Margin of Error. The city was already awake when they moved. London never truly slept, it only shifted rhythms. Sirens stitched themselves into traffic noise, lights flickered between ambition and exhaustion, and, somewhere ahead, a man still believed his life was balanced. Ashkin drove. The Mustang cut through lanes with controlled aggression, engine low and steady, hands firm on the wheel. No wasted motion. No panic. She drove like someone who refused to arrive too late. Shay sat rigid in the passenger seat, laptop balanced on her knees, tethered to power and signal like an umbilical cord. Her world had shrunk to numbers, timestamps, probability curves that kept rewriting themselves. He's accelerating, Shay said. The ledgers collapsing inward. Ashken didn't take her eyes off the road. Meaning? He didn't expect resistance, Shay replied. He's compressing the ritual. Less theater. More outcome. That shortens our window. Yes. Shay swallowed. Significantly. The target's location pulsed on the map, a private charity gala housed inside a restored banking hall. Marble. Glass. Security thick enough to feel safe. Ashken's jaw tightened. Public enough to make a statement. And protected enough to feel untouchable, Shay added. He likes irony. The killer's signal flickered again, faint, distorted, furious. Shay rerouted instinctively, fingers flying as she held him inside the maze she'd built. He's probing the walls, Shay muttered. Testing for weaknesses. Ashken felt it then, the weight of the clock. The cruel math of distance versus intent. How long? Ashken asked. Shay checked the projection. Her voice dropped. 7 minutes. Maybe less. Ashken accelerated. Traffic thickened like coagulating blood. Horns flared. A bus lurched into their lane. Ashken swore under her breath and threaded the Mustang through a gap that barely existed. Shay's knuckles went white. She didn't scream. Didn't close her eyes. She trusted the line. He's doing something, Shay said suddenly. Ashken's pulse spiked. What kind of something? He's letting me see him, Shay replied. Just enough to make me chase. The ledger spat out a new fragment, unstable, rushed. The scale is set. The crowd will watch. Balance does not wait. He's already inside, Shay said. Ashken took the turn too hard, tires screaming protest. Then we intercept. They arrived to a wall of light and sound security checkpoints, flashing cameras, polished smiles hiding rot. The gala had begun. Ashken killed the engine and was out of the car before it stopped rolling. Stay with me, she said, already moving. The crowd hit Shay like a physical force. Voices layered. Music pressed in. Too many bodies, too close, too loud. Her breath hitched. Ashken noticed instantly. Without breaking stride, she shifted half a step closer, body angled just enough to block the worst of it. No touch. No spectacle. Shield. Shay grounded herself in it. Inside, the banking hall gleamed. Chandeliers cast judgment from above. The target stood near the center, laughing, glass raised, untouchable. There, Shay said, voice tight. He's marked. Ashken scanned the room. Exits. Balconies. Load-bearing beams. Find the trigger, Ashken said. I'll find the hand. Shay ducked toward a side console, fingers already moving. The killer's code bled through the system, frantic now sloppy. He's improvising, Shay whispered. That's new. Ashken's gaze snapped upward. The chandelier. Too symmetrical. Too convenient. Shay, she said sharply. How long until execution? Shay's screen resolved. Her face drained of color. 30 seconds. Ashken moved. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She ran, heels pounding marble, eyes locked on the ceiling rigging. Security shouted. Guests gasped. Ashken leapt for the service ladder, climbing fast, muscles burning. Below, Shay ripped through the last firewall, not to block, but to interrupt. She injected noise into the system, delaying the signal by fractions of a second. Now, Shay shouted. Ashken reached the rigging and cut the release with one brutal motion. The chandelier jolted, but didn't fall. It swayed. Gasps turned to screams. Security surged. The target staggered back, pale and shaking, alive. The killer's signal screamed, then vanished. Gone. The hall erupted into chaos. Ashken climbed down, breath ragged, eyes immediately finding Shay. Shay was shaking, but standing. Alive. They locked eyes across the wreckage. No words. No relief yet. Just the knowledge that they had beaten the clock. By seconds. And somewhere, in the silence after failure, a killer recalculated. Because balance had almost been achieved. and almost was going to cost them both. Chapter 12. Killer escalates. The killer stopped singing. That was the first thing Shay noticed. No layered metaphors tucked inside shell companies. No sonnets disguised as balance sheets. No haiku hidden in offshore flows. Just numbers. Raw. Violent. Efficient. Shit, Shay muttered, fingers hovering over her keyboard like a pianist sensing the wrong key. He's evolved. Ashkin stood behind her, arms folded, posture tight, law, order, protocol stitched into every breath. Meaning? Meaning he realized poetry was slowing him down. Shay's eyes flicked across screens, pupils blown wide with adrenaline. This isn't art anymore. This is intent. The new message arrived without flourish. A single transaction. A single timestamp. A single destination. No verse. No tease. A threat stripped bare. Ashkin felt it then, the shift in the room. The air thickened, like the moment before a storm breaks its own rules. He's daring us, Ashkin said. Shay smiled. Not wide. Not soft. Sharp. No, she said quietly. He's bored. Ashkin turned. That's worse. Shay exhaled, long and steady, like she was lowering herself into cold water. He thinks we're predictable. Law and logic. Chase and react. Her fingers began to move. Firewalls bloomed like iron roses. Dummy servers spun into existence, mirrors inside mirrors, corridors that folded back on themselves. She scattered false trails with the precision of a poet who knew exactly where the rhyme shouldn't land. What are you doing? Ashkin asked, pulse quickening. Composing, Shay said. But this time, I'm writing him. She injected a pattern, subtle, elegant, irresistible. A financial echo. A return that looked accidental. A vulnerability that wasn't. Bait. Ashkin stiffened. That's not protocol. Shay didn't look up. Protocol got punished. Silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. Then Ashkin stepped closer, too close for comfort, too close for safety. If you do this, you're exposed. Shay finally met her eyes. And there it was. Not fear. Not bravado. Something feral and brilliant and lonely. He already knows I exist, Shay said. What he doesn't know is that I'm lonely enough to be interesting. The trap closed quietly. The killer followed the trail like a man following a familiar melody, confident, almost relieved to hear it again. He never noticed when the rhythm changed. By the time his systems began to lag, he was already inside the maze. By the time he realized the exits were false, Shay had his location triangulated down to a city block. Ashkin's phone rang. Coordinates. A countdown. A name. Oh my God, Ashkin whispered. He walked right into it. Shay leaned back, exhaustion finally cracking through her composure. He wanted danger. I gave him intimacy. Ashkin looked at her, really looked this time, and had to fight the urge to reach out, to anchor herself to this quiet, devastating mind. Instead, she straightened. Mask on. Control reclaimed. Let's move, she said coolly. Shay nodded, already rebuilding walls, already retreating inward. But as they stood to leave, another message slipped through, one last ghost packet Shay hadn't blocked. You chose her. Now choose who pays. The bond between them tightened. Fragile. Electric. Unavoidable. And somewhere in the city, the killer smiled. Because the hunt had finally become personal. Chapter 13. Pinned him. The killer moved before dawn. Shay felt it before she saw it, an itch beneath her skin, a wrongness in the code that had nothing to do with syntax and everything to do with intent. He's awake, she whispered. Ashkin was already on the phone, voice clipped, lethal calm wrapped in silk. SCO-19 is greenlit. Armed response en route. Hold positions. Shay's screens fractured into motion. The escalation came not as poetry, not as finance, but as exposure. Her address flickered once. Then vanished. Then reappeared somewhere it should never have been. A chill slid down her spine. He's trying to dox me, Shay said. No, worse. He's trying to flush me. Ashkin didn't hesitate. She crossed the room in 3 strides and physically blocked Shay from the monitors, like that could shield her from mathematics and malice alike. Eyes on me, Ashkin said. Low. Absolute. He doesn't get to look at you. Ash, this isn't. I know exactly what this is. Ashken turned, fingers already moving, issuing commands that cracked protocol like bone. Lock her digital footprint. Emergency suppression. Pull her off-grid. Now. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Servers rerouted. Cameras blacked out. Cell towers ghosted. Somewhere in the city, the killer realized his escalation had triggered something bigger than fear. The financial trail, his proudest composition, lit up like a flare. Shell companies collapsed inward. Accounts froze mid-transfer. A pattern emerged so clear it was almost insulting. Location. Time. Certainty. Found him, Shay breathed. He's going to the river. Warehouse district. He thinks he's hunting. Ashken's jaw tightened. He's walking into a firing line. The killer tried one last move. A message pushed through, raw, ugly, desperate. You could have been mine. She chose for you. Ashken saw it. Shay didn't. Good. Ashken leaned closer, voice dropping to something dangerous and intimate. He doesn't get you. Not your mind. Not your fear. And certainly not your loyalty. She turned to the room. SCO-19, target confirmed. Armed and dangerous. Authorized. At the warehouse, night split open. Floodlights ignited. Boots hit concrete. Red dots bloomed across brick and breath. The killer stepped out smiling until he saw the guns. Specialist Firearms Command moved like choreography perfected by necessity. Calm. Precise. Unforgiving. Armed police. Do not move. For the first time, the killer hesitated. And in that hesitation, his empire, built on numbers and narcissism, collapsed into cuffs and cold steel. Back in the operations room, the tension finally snapped. Shay exhaled, long and shaking. Ashken didn't say, "Are you okay?" She simply stayed. A hand near Shay's shoulder. Not touching. Guarding. The bond held. Bruised. Tested. Still alive. And as the city breathed again, both women knew. This wasn't the end. It was the moment the story admitted what it had always been about. Two minds. One choice. And a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. Chapter 14. Rivalry became violent. Terrence Chang didn't look like a monster. That was the cruel joke. He sat under fluorescent lights with his hands folded neatly, tailored coat still perfect, hair still disciplined into the shape of a man who had always believed the world owed him applause. Ashken watched him through the glass, instincts humming. He doesn't regret it. Shay didn't answer at first. She was staring at the file on the table between them. Chang, Terrence Wei. Top of their cohort. Second place every time. University memories surfaced like ghosts dragged up from deep water. He was brilliant, Shay said softly. But not original. Ashken glanced at her. And you were. Shay swallowed. I didn't even know he hated me. Ashken snorted, sharp and humorless. That's usually how it works. They went in together. Terrence looked up and smiled when he saw Shay, actually smiled, like this was a reunion he'd rehearsed in the mirror. Shaylee Sutton, he said warmly. Still hiding behind screens? Ashken stepped between them without thinking. You'll address her properly. Terrence's eyes flicked to Ashken, annoyance flashing. The Guardian. Then back to Shay. Hungry. Assessing. I watched you, Terrence said calmly. Your career. Your code. The way people talk about you like you're inevitable. Shay's voice was steady. Ice cold. You tried to kill people to prove a point. No, Terrence corrected. I turned finance into art. Like you did with code. Ashken leaned forward. You weaponized jealousy. Terrence laughed softly. I refined it. His gaze never left Shay. You were supposed to fail, he said. Burn out. Disappear. Instead, you kept winning. And no one ever asked how I felt watching that. There it was. Not madness. Not ideology. Just a man furious that brilliance had chosen someone else. You wanted to destroy me, Shay said. Not a question. Terrence tilted his head. I wanted you to know what it feels like when your work is used against you. Ashken's hand slammed onto the table. You targeted civilians. Terrence shrugged. Collateral. You understand systems. You know sacrifices are baked in. Shay stood. Slowly. Deliberately. You didn't study me, she said. If you had, you'd know I don't break when threatened. I adapt. Terrence's smile finally cracked. And you lost, she added. Because you confused admiration with ownership. Silence fell heavy. Ashken placed a hand on Shay's back, professional, subtle, unmistakably present. Terrence saw it. And for the first time, something like fear crossed his face. You chose her, he said bitterly, looking at Ashken. Ashken didn't blink. Every time. They walked out together, the door closing on Terrence Chang and his beautifully ruined equations. In the corridor, Shay exhaled shakily. I didn't even remember him, she murmured. Ashken's voice softened, just a fraction. That's what broke him. They moved down the hall. Not touching. Not retreating. Changed. Because envy may write the first act. But it never survives the moment it meets loyalty. Chapter 15. Spotlight. The morning came like a guillotine. Not gradual. Not gentle. Shay opened her laptop and froze. The headlines weren't subtle. Financial prodigy or catalyst for murder. The shadow behind London's serial killer. Ex-university rival claims vendetta against top coder. Is Shaylee Sutton to blame? From recluse to scapegoat, the woman who stopped Terrence Chang. Her private life, carefully folded and stored like rare vinyl records in a closet no one could touch, had been ripped open and exposed to the glare of a world that wanted a story, not truth. Shay's hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling. Not from fear, but from the raw, untethered violation of boundaries she had spent decades building. Ashken arrived before she could respond, calm but storm-gray, presence like a shield. They're speculating, she said softly. None of this is verified. Shay didn't answer. She barely moved, staring at the images of herself, candid shots from a university gala, from charity fundraisers, even a photo of her tiny Cambridge apartment from a drone's perspective. She hadn't just been exposed, she had been dismantled publicly. Ashken crouched slightly beside her. Listen to me. They'll calm down. You saved lives. That doesn't change. Doesn't change, Shay repeated, voice low. But they're asking if the murders, if he only escalated because of me. If Terrence Chang killed, because he couldn't beat me. Ashken's jaw tightened. Yes. And no. He's a coward disguised as a genius. The murders were always his. But yes, he needed a target to justify his obsession. Shay closed her eyes. She had never been comfortable with visibility, with people watching, parsing, judging, expecting. Solitude had been her fortress. Now it was a spotlighted cage. Ashken's hand brushed against Shay's back, brief, grounding, silent, but Shay felt it as sharply as if someone had struck a chord inside her chest. She flinched, instinctively protective of herself, but also aware. Do you want me to do damage control? Ashken asked. Shay shook her head. No. Let them dig. Let them wonder. Truth will come out, eventually. Ashken studied her. You've never let anyone in. You're not hiding behind screens anymore. Shay let a ghost of a smile curve her lips. No, I'm not. A knock at the door. Mark, Ashken's assistant, appeared with fresh intelligence reports from SCO-19. Terrence Chang's movements, financial anomalies, forensic links, everything was collated. He'd been neutralized physically, yes, but the digital trail, the obsession, the chaos he'd caused, that would linger. Shay turned back to the screen. Headlines flashing. Photos, speculation, commentary. And she realized something dangerous. She was finally visible. Not just to the world, but to Ashken too. The thought made her pulse quicken, and she pushed it down, fierce, private, untouchable. You can't hide anymore, Ashken said quietly. I don't want to hide, Shay replied softly. I just don't want them to see me like this. Ashken didn't answer. She simply stayed beside her, storm-gray eyes a shield and a challenge all at once. The killer was gone. But the aftermath? The world would never stop testing her. And Ashken? She would be the only constant in that fire. Because loyalty, once chosen, doesn't evaporate in the spotlight. It burns brighter. Chapter 16. Vinyl and Shelter. Shaylee Sutton's sanctuary had been violated. Her Cambridge studio, normally a fortress of silence, was now a stage for flashing cameras and hungry microphones. She had ducked into her car, heart pounding, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Every honk, every distant click of a shutter grated on her nerves. Ashkan arrived, calm, precise, and impatient. "Get in." "Now." Shay hesitated only a fraction before climbing into the passenger seat of the Mustang. The drive was quiet. London moved around them, oblivious, lights streaking past like a river of judgment. "I don't usually," Shay started, fingers tightening on the edge of the seat, "let people in." Ashkan glanced at her briefly. "Neither do I. But you need a place to breathe tonight." Shay exhaled, a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "And you trust me?" she asked, voice small. Ashkan didn't answer directly. She simply drove. When they arrived at Ashkan's apartment, the door closed behind them like a sigh. No cameras. No speculation. No chaos. Just walls, books, and the faint scent of old coffee and polish. Shay's eyes flicked around the room, catching a glint of something. Vinyl. Rows and rows of them, stacked neatly. An entire wall dedicated to spines and covers, classics, obscure pressings, rare finds. And then, the player. Her fingers brushed it lightly, almost reverent. You have won," she murmured. Ashkan lifted an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Yes. What of it?" Shay's laugh was quiet, almost shy. I have a weakness for vinyl. Always have. I'll drive hours just to find a record I want, even if I don't have a player yet." Ashkan studied her. "Why?" Shay hesitated. "It's tactile. Real. A rhythm you can touch, not just scroll through. You can't hide behind it. It's music you hold, not just watch." Ashkan's storm gray eyes softened. "I understand that." Shay moved closer to the shelf, fingers gliding across covers, occasionally pulling one out and reading the notes on the back. "I never told anyone," she admitted. "No one understands why I collect them." Ashkan picked a record from the stack. Maybe no one needed to. Until now. Shay looked at her, startled. Until now. Ashkan set the record carefully on the player and lowered the needle. The scratchy warmth of the first track filled the apartment. A rich, deep sound that wrapped itself around them both. Shay sank into the couch, letting the music wash over her. "I forgot how," she trailed off, voice soft, "alive this feels." Ashkan sat beside her, keeping her distance, but just close enough for the proximity to hum between them. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly. Shay turned slightly, eyes reflecting the warm glow of the record's needle. "Me too," she admitted. For the first time in weeks, the world outside didn't exist. The killer's shadow, the headlines, the chaos, all of it faded. All that mattered was vinyl, warmth, and the quiet company of someone who understood the spaces between words and beats. A bond, fragile and electric, began to thread itself through the hum of a needle on vinyl, carrying them both into a night where nothing else could touch them. Chapter 17. Needle Drops. The record ended with a soft hiss, the kind that felt like a held breath finally released. Ashkan stood, crossed the room, and lifted the needle with practiced care. "Pick one," she said, gesturing to the shelf. "I trust your taste." Shay blinked. "That's dangerous." Ashkan smirked. "So I've been told." Shay rose slowly, as if sudden movement might break the spell. She ran her fingers along the spines, jazz, post-punk, old Armenian folk pressings, obscure indie compilations. "You organize them by mood," Shay observed. Ashkan glanced over. "By survival." Shay's lips twitched. "That tracks." She pulled out a record, hesitated, then replaced it. Another. Then another. Each decision felt oddly intimate, like revealing something without speaking it aloud. Finally, she chose one. Ashkan took it from her, eyes flicking briefly to the cover. She said softly. "This one only comes out at night." Shay felt something warm settle low in her chest. "You name your records?" "No," Ashkan replied, placing it on the player. "They name themselves." The needle dropped. The music was slower. Heavier. Bass-rich and deliberate, like footsteps echoing down an empty street. Shay sat back on the couch, arms loosely folded, pretending not to notice how close Ashkin sat this time. Pretending badly. This is intimate, Shay said after a moment. Ashkin tilted her head. Does that make you uncomfortable? Shay shook her head. No. It makes me exposed. Ashkin didn't look away. You spend your life building firewalls. I imagine silence feels loud when they come down. Shay exhaled a quiet laugh. You have no idea. Another track began. Another brick loosened. Shay leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I collect vinyl because it doesn't demand anything from me, she admitted. It exists. It waits. No expectations. Ashkin's voice was low. And people? Shay hesitated. People want access. Ashkin met her gaze, steady and unreadable. I don't. That did it. The wall didn't shatter. It shifted. A hairline fracture, invisible to anyone else, but Shay felt it. The third record played. Shay found herself smiling without realizing it. Laughing softly when Ashkin told her how she once chased down a seller across 3 boroughs for a first pressing. Noticing the way Ashkin's hands moved precise, reverent, when handling the records. You're different when you're not working, Shay murmured. Ashkin raised an eyebrow. Is that a complaint? No, Shay said quickly, then softer, it's nice. The fourth record. The couch felt smaller. The space between them warmer. Shay's knee brushed Ashkin's. Neither moved away. Shay swallowed. Brick by brick, she thought. Every song another one gone. Every note undoing years of carefully constructed distance. I don't usually let people see this part of me, Shay said quietly. Ashkin's response was immediate. I won't misuse it. Shay believed her. That realization hit harder than any flirtation ever could. The record spun. The needle hummed. The walls continued their quiet collapse. And somewhere between vinyl 4 and 5, Shaylee Sutton realized something terrifying and exquisite. She wasn't being invaded. She was choosing. Chapter 18. Almost touching. The record crackled softly as it spun, a low, steady hum filling the apartment like a heartbeat. The lights were dim now. Ashkin hadn't turned them down. The night had simply claimed the room. Shay shifted on the couch, tucking one leg beneath her. Her fingers rested on her knee, tracing invisible patterns she hadn't coded yet. Ashkin stood near the player, back half-turned, listening not just to the music, but to the silence between them. The charged, unspoken kind. You're thinking too loudly, Ashkin said. Shay huffed a quiet laugh. Occupational hazard. Ashkin crossed back toward the couch, slower this time. She sat close, but not touching. Close enough that Shay could feel warmth. Close enough to notice the faint scent of citrus and something darker beneath it. The song shifted, strings tightening, vocals low and raw. Shay reached for the sleeve of the record on the table, meaning only to read the liner notes. Her fingers brushed something else. Ashkin's hand. It was nothing, barely a graze. But Shay's breath caught, sharp and traitorous. Ashkin froze. Not pulling away. Not pressing closer. Just present. Shay started, then stopped. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Sorry. Don't be, Ashkin said quietly. Their hands were still close. A centimeter. Maybe less. Shay's thumb hovered near Ashkin's knuckles. She didn't touch. She didn't trust herself to. Ashkin's gaze dropped to the space between them. If you ask me to move, she said, voice steady, I will. Shay swallowed. If you don't, Ashkin continued, I'll stay exactly here. The record spun. The room held its breath. Shay didn't ask her to move. Ashkin didn't close the distance. Their hands remained suspended in that electric in-between, where intention outweighed action and restraint felt like choice, not denial. Shay leaned back slightly, laughter soft and disbelieving. This is ridiculous. Ashkin smiled, slow, dangerous. You're the one who works in probabilities. Shay met her eyes. And this one terrifies me. Good, Ashkin murmured. It means it matters. Another track began. The moment passed, not dissolved, just stored. Filed away carefully, like evidence too important to mishandle. Shay withdrew her hand, but not without reluctance. Ashkin let her. No lines were crossed. But something irreversible had shifted. Because once you hover that close, the distance never feels the same again. Chapter 19. Morning finds them. Morning didn't arrive gently. It slipped through the blinds like an accusation. Shay woke first. She lay still on the couch, blanket half fallen, one arm tucked beneath her head. The apartment was quiet in that way that only exists before the city remembers itself. Pale light traced the edges of furniture, the vinyl shelves, the record player still, reverent, waiting. And Ashken. She was asleep in the armchair opposite, head tilted slightly to the side, hair loosened from its usual discipline. One hand rested on the armrest, fingers relaxed, unguarded in a way Shay had never seen. Shay's chest tightened. This is dangerous, she thought, not panicked, just precise. Like diagnosing a fault in code that could bring down an entire system. She sat up slowly, every movement deliberate. Her eyes kept betraying her, pulling her back to Ashken. To the quiet strength. To the calm that had wrapped around her the night before without asking permission. Ashken stirred. Storm gray eyes opened and immediately sharpened, then softened when they found Shay awake. Morning, Ashken said, voice rough with sleep. Shay nodded. Morning. The word hung between them, heavier than it had any right to be. Ashken stood, stretching slightly, the movement unself-conscious. Shay looked away too late. They both noticed. Coffee became an excuse. Ashken busied herself in the kitchen, grinding beans, clattering mugs. Shay perched on the edge of the couch, hands folded, posture too neat for someone who claimed to dislike people. The vinyl shelves watched them like witnesses. Ashken handed Shay a mug. Their fingers brushed. This time, neither apologized. Did you sleep? Ashken asked. Yes, Shay answered. Then, after a beat, better than I have in weeks. Ashken nodded once, as if filing that away. Good. Silence again, but different now. Charged. Awake. Shay stared into her coffee. About last night. Ashken leaned back against the counter. You don't have to explain. I know, Shay said. She lifted her gaze. But I want to be clear. Ashken met her eyes steady. Waiting. I don't do this, Shay continued. I don't blur lines. I don't invite people into my quiet. And I definitely don't almost. She stopped herself, lips pressing together. Almost touch. Ashken supplied gently. Shay huffed a breath. Yes. Ashken didn't smile. She didn't retreat either. Then let me be clear too. Shay's pulse kicked. I won't push, Ashken said. I won't assume. And I won't pretend I didn't feel it. Shay's throat went dry. That would be dishonest, Ashken added. And you deserve better than that. Sunlight crept higher, illuminating everything they'd carefully ignored. The attraction. The trust. The fragile, undeniable pull that had nothing to do with adrenaline or proximity. This complicates things, Shay said quietly. Ashken's mouth curved, not teasing, not smug. Just real. Everything worth anything does. They stood there, facing each other in the full light of morning, no music to soften the edges. No night to hide behind. Only choice. Shay took a slow breath. I don't know where this goes. Ashken's answer was immediate. Neither do I. A beat. But, Ashken added, I know I don't regret letting the morning see us. Shay's lips curved small, sincere, unguarded. Neither of them crossed the line. Not yet. But daylight had done its damage. The walls were down. The truth was awake. And whatever came next, protocol, danger, desire, it would never be unfelt again. Chapter 20. Coded Coordinates. The week had been merciless. Headlines faded, but the memory of cameras flashing at her Cambridge apartment still lingered like a shadow. Shaylee Sutton was back in her routine, code, coffee, and carefully calibrated solitude. Then her phone buzzed. From Ashken, decode me if you dare. Attached was a string of numbers, punctuation, and symbols, encrypted coordinates that only someone who understood both logic and poetry could unravel. Shay smirked, fingers moving over the keys. Within minutes, the pattern revealed the location, a small town several hours outside London. The kind of place where nothing moved fast except for secrets. She glanced at the clock. Evening light was already stretching over the city. A thrill, sharp and sharp-edged, coiled in her chest. The town was quaint. Streets narrow, brick buildings leaning in conspiratorial angles. Shay parked, double-checked the decoded coordinates, and followed the map into the old industrial district. One warehouse stood apart, walls faded, paint peeling, the kind of place that screamed stories untold. Signs outside read, "Flea Market, Antiques and Oddities." Shay's pulse quickened when she saw Ashken standing near the entrance. Her storm-gray eyes met Shay's, and the ghost of a smile tugged at her lips. "You decoded me faster than I expected," Ashken said, voice low, teasing. "Don't underestimate the power of boredom and obsessive curiosity," Shay replied, locking the Jeep and stepping out. Ashken extended a hand, not for shaking, just gesturing toward the warehouse. "Come. There's something I think you'll like." Inside, the flea market smelled of varnish, old paper, and dust, memory distilled into scent. Booths overflowed with relics, brass candlesticks, faded photographs, glass bottles with corks long dried, stacks of yellowed sheet music. And then Ashken stopped. Shay followed her gaze. An antique record player, beautiful and untouched by time, stood on a low wooden table. Ashken lifted the lid, brushing a hand across the smooth turntable reverently. "I thought you might like this," Ashken said, eyes meeting Shay's with that quiet intensity that made the air itself hum. Shay's breath hitched. You want to buy it for me?" Ashken shrugged, smooth, casual. "I thought it belonged in the hands of someone who appreciates it." Shay approached slowly, circling the player as if she were afraid of breaking a spell. "It's perfect. I mean, it's ridiculous, but perfect." Ashken smiled faintly. "Not ridiculous. Necessary." Back at Shay's apartment, the record player gleamed in her living room, catching the fading sunlight like it had waited its whole life for this moment. Shay lifted the lid, set a vinyl she had picked up weeks ago on the turntable, and dropped the needle. The music crackled warmly, filling the space in a way even her precise coding world couldn't replicate. Ashken watched from the doorway, leaning lightly against the frame. "So this is your collection?" Shay laughed softly, spinning through the shelves. "Not just music. These are memories. Obsessions. Some of the only things I let be messy in my life." Ashken stepped further in, hands tucked in pockets, watching Shay in a way that said more than words ever could. "I see why it matters." Shay paused, hand resting on the edge of the record shelf. "I never let anyone see it." "You did now," Ashken said simply, voice low, "sure." Shay glanced at her, and for the first time, let a fraction of her guard fall. The almost touch from the morning still tingled at her skin, threading itself into the warmth of music and company. "You make dangerous invitations," Shay said softly. "And you always decode them," Ashken replied, stepping closer. The distance between them was less than it had ever been, charged, electric, inevitable. The record spun. The night settled around them. And in the glow of lamplight and vinyl, something unspoken, fragile, electric, utterly theirs took root. Chapter 21. Spinning Secrets. The warm hum of the antique record player filled the apartment, curling into the corners like smoke from a candle. Shaylee Sutton ran her fingers across the spines of her collection, stopping at a small, unassuming box tucked into the far corner of the shelf. Ashken's storm-gray eyes followed her every movement, quiet but unyielding, like she had all the time in the world to watch and wait. Shay lifted the box gently. "These," she began, voice softer than she intended, "are the ones I value most. The ones I never let anyone see." Ashken didn't move, didn't comment. She simply let Shay set the box on the coffee table between them, as if giving her that space was permission enough. Shay opened it carefully, revealing a handful of records in pristine sleeves, edges slightly worn from reverent handling. She pulled one out, the cover faded, colors soft with age. "This," Shay said, setting it on the player, "is the first record I ever bought when I decided I would collect them properly. It's a reminder of who I was when I thought I had time to figure things out." Ashken watched as Shay's hands lingered over the turntable, dropping the needle with a precision born of ritual. The music began, a soft, haunting melody, a song that carried both fragility and fire. Shay sank onto the couch, knees tucked under her chin, eyes not quite meeting Ashkin's. I wasn't supposed to grow attached to things or people, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Ashkin's gaze softened, unwavering. But you do. And it's why this matters. Shay's lips twitched into a smile she didn't even try to hide. I always said vinyl was my safe place. I never expected someone else to understand why. I understand, Ashkin said simply. And then, after a beat, I see why it's worth protecting. Shay looked up, startled by the intensity of that statement. Her chest tightened in a way she didn't recognize, not fear, not anxiety, but connection. She picked another record from the box, her hands trembling slightly as she slid it out. This one, it's rare. Hard to find. I never play it for anyone. Ashkin leaned closer, though still careful to respect boundaries. Then let me be the first. Shay hesitated, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. The needle dropped. The room was filled with a warm, enveloping sound, the kind that wraps around you and makes the outside world disappear. As the music played, Shay felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, the fragile comfort of trust. And beside her, Ashkin simply watched, not intruding, not judging, just present. Minutes passed. The city outside moved on, but here, in the cocoon of music and vinyl, the walls Shay had built around herself crumbled quietly, brick by brick. When the track ended, Shay turned slightly, daring a glance at Ashkin. The storm-gray eyes met hers, steady, unflinching, and something unspoken passed between them. A promise, perhaps. Or a question. What happens now that the walls are down? Shay smiled softly, letting the tension slip just enough to breathe. You know, I think I could get used to this. Ashkin's lips curved, almost imperceptibly. I'll hold you to that. And for the first time, music wasn't the only thing spinning in the room. Chapter 22. Storm Gray Secrets. The soft hum of the record player filled the apartment, notes curling around the room like smoke, and Shay leaned back into the couch cushions, letting herself linger in the warmth of the music. Ashkin stood near the shelf for a moment, watching, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. Then, deliberately, she walked over, stopping beside the coffee table where Shay's prized records rested. The storm-gray eyes softened, not a flicker, not a glint, but steady and unyielding. I haven't shared this with anyone, Ashkin began, voice low, careful. Not like this. Not fully. Shay's gaze lifted instantly. You don't have to say anything, Ashkin said quickly, holding up a hand. Just listen. Shay nodded, pulse quickening, aware that something inside her recognized this moment as sacred. Ashkin crouched slightly, elbows on her knees, eyes fixed on a single record in the box. I wasn't born here, she admitted. I grew up somewhere, complicated. Armenia. I had a life that demanded silence, obedience, and perfection. Anything less was dangerous. Shay leaned forward, caught by the weight in Ashkin's words, the raw edges of a past she'd never shared with anyone. My father was a man of structure. He expected precision in every detail of life. And when I chose forensics, it wasn't just a career. It was survival. Proof that I could see what others missed, control what could spiral. It became my armor. Ashkin's hand lifted, hovering over the record sleeves. I protect. I predict. I solve. That's how I've survived every mess, every chaos that could have swallowed me. Shay's voice was soft, careful. And you never let anyone in. Ashkin tilted her head, eyes locking with Shay's. Not fully. Until now. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe, because you already saw more of me than anyone else has. Or maybe, because I trust you to understand without judgment. Shay felt her chest tighten. I do. I see you, Ashkin. The real you. And I'm honored more than I can say. Ashkin's storm-gray eyes flicked to the spinning needle, then back to Shay. Then promise me you'll treat it carefully. My past, it's fragile. And I don't let people break it. I won't, Shay whispered. I promise. For a long moment, they simply existed in the space together, the spinning vinyl, the dimming sunlight, the quiet that only grew louder with truth. Ashkin exhaled slowly, a rare softness in her posture. Sharing this, it's risky. Shows weakness. Shay shook her head. No. Shows strength. Shows you choose trust. And in that choice, in the delicate exchange of pasts, music, and honesty, something unspoken solidified. This wasn't just curiosity or fascination anymore. It was connection. Ashkin's hand brushed against Shay's, not intentionally, not to cross the line, but the heat lingered where contact almost happened, proof that intimacy didn't need to be claimed in full to leave its mark. The record spun, carrying both music and confessions into the night, and for the first time, they both understood. Walls could fall. Trust could be given. And in the aftermath, something far stronger than attraction began to root itself quietly between them. Chapter 23. Needle and Breath. The needle hummed, a soft, steady vibration that seemed to match the rhythm of their hearts. Shay sat on the couch, knees tucked close, arms wrapped loosely around herself. Ashkin lingered near the shelf, hands brushing over the vinyl spines almost absent-mindedly, eyes flicking to Shay, storm gray and unguarded. The room was quiet but charged. Words had already been shared, truths revealed, walls had crumbled. Yet neither of them moved. Shay shifted, a small sigh escaping. Ashkin tilted her head, her voice low, almost a whisper. Don't say it. Shay froze. The words weren't meant to be spoken. They were meant to be felt. Ashkin stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. Each movement deliberate, measured, not just for Shay, but for herself. She stopped just short of the couch, close enough that Shay could feel the warmth radiating from her. The music played, low and intimate. Shay's fingers twitched against her knees. Ashkin reached out, not to grab, not to pull, but to brush a stray strand of hair from Shay's face. Fingers grazing her cheek. A spark. A small, electric jolt. Shay swallowed. Her breath caught. Her hands curled in her lap, trembling slightly. Shay started, but Ashkin silenced her with a look. No words were needed. Ashkin leaned in. Tentatively. Not fully, just enough that Shay could feel the heat of her presence, the faint brush of her lips against Shay's. Shay's eyes fluttered closed. Her own hand lifted, hovering near Ashkin's chest, then faltered. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. The kiss, so slight, so careful, lasted a heartbeat longer than either dared. Neither claimed dominance. Neither rushed. It was a promise. A question. A fragile thread tying them together in ways words never could. Ashkin pulled back just slightly, eyes meeting Shay's. You don't have to respond, she murmured. Not yet. Shay's lips parted in a whisper. I don't want to. Ashkin's lips curved, faintly, storm gray eyes softening. Good. They stayed there, suspended, the music spinning around them, hearts echoing against each other. The first kiss had happened, tentative and trembling, but undeniable. And somewhere deep inside, they both knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 24. Codes of the Heart. Ashkin left the apartment the next morning before sunrise, slipping out quietly with a takeaway coffee and her forensic kit. Shay stayed behind, wrapped in the comfort of the record player's hum and the memory of storm gray eyes and tentative lips. The world outside their walls demanded logic, procedure, and precision. And slowly, almost without realizing it, their communication had shifted to code. Ashkin's messages were deliberate, small numeric sequences hidden in case notes, strings of letters tucked in reports, anything Shay could decrypt if she cared enough to try. Shay's responses were equally subtle, binary replies embedded in spreadsheets, algorithms that hid little pings and patterns Ashkin would notice, if only she looked closely. It became their rhythm, their intimacy, their tether. Later that evening, Shay stared at her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to see Ashkin, to speak to her outside of the cold lines of investigation. But the shy, guarded part of her froze at the thought of just asking outright. Then she smiled. Code doesn't lie. She typed. A string of characters, simple but meaningful, that only Ashkin could decode. / coordinates 51.5123 -0.0947 / inquiry time-sensitive / awaiting presence, required */ a digital heartbeat hidden in the language of their work. She hit send. Ashkin's phone buzzed minutes later. She opened the message and paused, recognizing the subtlety immediately. Time-sensitive? Ashkin thought. Required presence? A small smile tugged at her lips. Shaylee Sutton, you're impossible. Within moments, Ashkin typed back in kind. / confirmed / departure, 1,900 hours / preparedness, anticipated / response, expected */. Shay's phone pinged. She read the reply and felt her chest tighten. Even in code, Ashkin's voice reached her. Even in hidden coordinates, her presence demanded attention. That evening, Shay drove to the rendezvous point, a quiet corner of London, far from the press, far from the chaos of their work. Ashkin was already there, leaning casually against her car, storm-gray eyes scanning the street. She didn't smile immediately, didn't speak. She just was, a presence Shay had learned to crave without admitting it. Shay parked, heart hammering. Ashkin's gaze met hers, steady, and in that look, Shay felt the quiet thrill of connection, the intimacy of language only they understood. Deciphered correctly, Ashkin said finally, her tone carrying something softer than usual. Shay's lips curved, shy, reluctant. I wasn't sure you'd. I always do, Ashkin interrupted, a hint of amusement in her voice. And there it was, their language of choice, their secret, the way love could exist between lines of code, numbers, and subtle signals. In that moment, nothing needed to be spoken aloud. Every glance, every carefully crafted message carried more weight than words ever could. The city hummed around them, unaware of the tiny pulse of something fragile, electric, and irrevocable that connected two people who had once guarded their hearts like evidence at a crime scene. Chapter 25, Falling in Code. The apartment was quiet. The record player hummed a low, soothing note, a soundtrack to the subtle pulse that had begun between them. Shay sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, her fingers dancing over the keys, translating Ashkin's latest string of symbols. / observation. Presence improves system stability / effectiveness. Exceeds threshold / status. Necessary */. Shay paused, rereading the code. Necessary? She blinked, heart catching in her chest. Even in logic, even in hidden sequences, Ashkin's words were slowly carving themselves into her mind. Every message became a heartbeat. Every sequence a confession. Later, Ashkin sat in her office, staring at Shay's latest encrypted reply. / confirmation. Presence noted / emotional impact. Positive / anticipated repetition. Yes */. Ashkin's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Anticipated repetition? She closed her eyes, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It was absurd. Completely absurd. They were falling. Through code. Through patterns. Through logic and numbers and the quiet, impossible intimacy of hidden messages. Ashkin leaned back in her chair, storm-gray eyes unfocused. She could feel it in her chest, the pull she'd never allowed herself to name, the tether that grew stronger with every line, every carefully calculated symbol from Shay. Shay leaned back against the couch, letting the glow of her screen illuminate her face. Her chest tightened in a way she couldn't rationalize, couldn't code. She whispered softly, almost to herself, I think I'm falling. The words weren't meant to be heard. But for the first time, she realized she wasn't afraid to admit them, even in the shadows of numbers and letters. When Ashkin arrived that evening, Shay felt it, the small, electric tingle that preceded every heartbeat. No words were exchanged. Just a look. A pause. The faint understanding that in the quiet spaces between messages, in the pauses between code, they were no longer just colleagues. They were something else entirely. Something fragile. Something undeniable. And in that silence, they let themselves feel it. For the first time, falling for someone didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like home. Chapter 26, The Heart's Firewall Falls. The apartment was bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. Shadows played over vinyl spines and the smooth surface of the antique record player. The needle paused mid-track, as if holding its breath. Shay sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, laptop closed beside her. She didn't move to put it away. She didn't want to break the fragile bubble that had formed in the quiet hours after Ashken arrived. Ashken leaned against the doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame. Storm gray eyes soft, not calculating, not guarded, just present. Shay's chest tightened. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to letting anyone see this side of her, the side that needed warmth, trust, and care more than logic or code. Stay, Shay whispered, almost to herself. Ashken's eyes lifted. I am, she said simply, stepping fully into the room. No theatrics, no words of reassurance, just her. Shay's hands twitched. She wanted to reach out, but she hesitated. And yet, the tension didn't frighten her. Not like it should have. You don't have to say anything, Ashken added, moving closer, the distance between them shrinking until it was measured in heartbeats rather than meters. Shay's eyes met hers, and something fragile, electric, unspoken passed between them. The walls she had built, high, precise, impenetrable, quivered under the weight of presence alone. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Shay shifted, letting a hand brush Ashken's sleeve. The touch was tentative, questioning, testing boundaries. Ashken didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into it slightly, the smallest of acknowledgments that this connection was welcome. Shay exhaled softly, a shiver running through her spine. I don't usually let anyone in, she admitted, voice low, almost swallowed by the quiet of the room. Ashken's lips curved gently. I know, she said. And I won't rush. I just want to be here. With you. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. In their simplicity, they carried more weight than any grand confession. Shay's hand found Ashken's, fingertips brushing, then lingering. Her guard, carefully coded and calibrated over years, crumbled in a way she didn't entirely understand and didn't care to. For the first time in her life, Shay felt the quiet thrill of trust without calculation, intimacy without expectation. She let herself lean slightly into Ashken's warmth, her shoulder brushing against her arm, a small, deliberate surrender. Ashken's eyes softened further, and she lowered her hand, letting their fingers entwine. No words were spoken. No grand gestures made. Just presence. Just the pulse of two hearts learning to exist side by side. The record player spun gently. The music wrapped around them, a cocoon of warmth, history, and shared breaths. Shay allowed herself to close her eyes, resting her head just slightly closer to Ashken. And in that tiny, precarious space, she discovered something she hadn't thought possible. She could let someone into her heart. And survive. Chapter 27. Whispers in the Dark. The record spun quietly in the corner, filling the room with the soft crackle of vinyl, a pulse that seemed to match their own. Shay leaned back against the couch. Ashken crouched beside her, knees brushing, just close enough that the warmth was unavoidable. Shay's hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, eyes fixed on the floor. I wasn't always like this, she whispered, voice small, almost fragile. I mean, closed off. Guarded. Ashken's fingers brushed against hers, tentative, just enough to anchor her. I can see that, she murmured. You don't have to explain unless you want to. Shay swallowed, heart hammering, and finally let the words come. I trusted someone once. Someone I thought I could rely on. Let them in completely. And they broke me. Not physically, but everything else. My trust, my walls, my sense of safety. I've been careful ever since. Shielded. Ashken leaned closer, letting her forehead brush Shay's temple, soft, grounding. You're allowed to be hurt, she said quietly. You're allowed to be scared. But you don't have to face it alone. Shay's breath hitched, chest tightening as fingers intertwined with Ashken's. She dared to tilt her head, letting her lips graze the side of Ashken's face, a whisper of contact, a test. Ashken didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into it, letting the brush of lips trail along her jaw, a soft, deliberate exploration. I don't Do this, Shay admitted, voice trembling, letting someone see me, like this. Ashken's thumb stroked the back of Shay's hand. Then let it be slow. Let it be safe. Let it be ours. Shay let herself lean forward, tentatively pressing her lips to Ashken's, soft, tentative, exploring. Ashken's hands moved to cradle her face gently, tilting her head just so. The kiss deepened imperceptibly, careful, hungry, but measured, tasting the words Shay hadn't yet spoken aloud. Their breaths mingled, slow and shallow at first, then growing more insistent, more desperate for closeness. Fingers traced along arms, hands brushing over shoulders, lingering along the curve of a spine. Every touch was a whispered promise, a confession of trust, a claim of presence. Shay's lips parted, Ashken's following, and they melted into each other with the quiet ferocity of two hearts finally finding safety in a single touch. Ashken's forehead rested against Shay's, eyes closed. You're safe, she murmured. With me. Shay exhaled, letting her walls crumble completely, letting herself feel the warmth, the safety, the desire. I think I can be, she whispered. And in that moment, with the record spinning softly, hands tangled and breaths mingling, the world outside, the codes, the danger, the killer ceased to exist. It was just them, fragile and unguarded, discovering intimacy in whispers, slow touches, and kisses that spoke the words their hearts could barely contain. Chapter 28, Night of Surrender. The city beyond the window hummed softly, lights blinking like distant stars. Inside, the apartment was a cocoon, warm, dim, and heavy with quiet electricity. The record spun low, a sultry rhythm that wrapped around them, urging them closer. Shay sat against Ashken, legs tucked to her chest, Ashken's arm draped over her shoulders. Their hands intertwined, fingers tracing each other with tentative curiosity, exploring boundaries neither of them had dared to cross before. I never thought I'd let someone this close, Shay whispered, voice trembling but steady, and not just physically. Emotionally. Ashken tilted her head, letting her lips brush Shay's temple in a feather-like kiss. Then tonight, don't think. Just feel. Shay shivered, surrendering to the warmth of Ashken's body, the steady pulse of her presence against her own. A hand slid from her shoulder down her arm, fingertips grazing skin, lingering in silent invitation. Shay's breath caught, then faltered as she tilted closer, lips brushing Ashken's neck, tasting the faint warmth and scent of her. Ashken's hand rose to cradle Shay's face, thumb brushing her cheek slowly, deliberately. Their eyes met, unspoken understanding passing between them, no words needed tonight. Just touch. Just presence. Just the rhythm of two hearts sinking in quiet, fragile intimacy. Shay's lips found Ashken's again, this time deeper, more certain. The kiss was slow, teasing, then insistent, as though the world outside no longer existed, as though every worry, every guarded wall, melted under the heat of their closeness. Ashken's fingers traced the curve of Shay's spine, tilting her body closer, guiding her gently. Shay let herself lean into her, letting the tension she had carried for years dissolve, letting the storm of past betrayals wash away in the warmth of Ashken's embrace. Soft whispers and low murmurs filled the apartment, mingling with the hum of the vinyl. Every brush of lips, every lingering fingertip, every tentative exploration of skin was a promise of trust, of connection, of surrender. Shay's hands roamed freely now, mapping the lines of Ashken's body, memorizing the strength and warmth she had so long withheld from anyone. Ashken responded in kind, hands and lips exploring the curves, the subtle shivers, the hidden sighs. Time stretched and folded around them, the night holding its breath. Every moment was an eternity, every touch a confession, every kiss a vow unspoken. Finally, Shay exhaled fully, letting go completely for the first time in years. She pressed herself against Ashken, lips grazing, hands clutching, heart open and unshielded. Ashken's arms encircled her firmly, anchoring her, grounding her in this moment of absolute vulnerability. I'm here, Shay whispered, voice muffled against Ashken's collarbone. I know, Ashken murmured back, brushing a thumb over the line of her jaw. And I won't let go. Outside, the city carried on unaware, but inside, the world had narrowed to two people, two hearts, and one long, endless night of shared surrender. The record spun on, carrying their whispers, their touches, their first complete surrender to each other, and for once, nothing else existed but them. Chapter 29. Sacred Surrender. The apartment had become a sanctuary. Shadows flickered across vinyl spines and the smooth curves of the antique record player, the soft hum filling the spaces between their breaths. Ashken and Shay lay close, limbs tangled, warmth pooling around them like a protective cocoon. Shay's head rested against Ashken's chest, listening to the steady pulse beneath her fingers, letting the rhythm anchor her in a way she hadn't felt in years. Every breath Ashken took, every subtle movement, reassured her that the walls she had built were not only crumbling, they were being replaced with something far stronger. Trust. I don't know if I've ever been this open, Shay whispered, voice trembling. Completely. With anyone. Ashken's lips brushed the crown of her head, a gentle, grounding kiss. Then let this be ours. No expectations. No judgment. Just presence. Just us. Shay exhaled, letting herself sink deeper into the warmth, letting her fingers trace the lines of Ashken's arms, memorizing every contour, every imperfection, every tremor of strength and care. Ashken tilted her head, catching Shay's gaze with storm-gray eyes softened by intimacy. She traced a finger along Shay's jawline, letting it linger, mapping the vulnerability that had taken years to build. "You're safe here," she murmured. "With me. Completely." Shay's breath hitched, chest rising and falling in tandem with Ashken's. Slowly, cautiously, she pressed her lips to Ashken's again, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. Ashken responded in kind, hands sliding to cradle Shay's face, then down her back, holding her close, anchoring her. They moved together with a fluidity born of trust. Fingers intertwined, lips searching, soft murmurs spilling into the quiet room like prayers. Every touch was deliberate, sacred, exploring not just the body, but the soul. Shay let herself finally release all the tension she'd carried for years. Every fear, every betrayal, every wall of steel she'd built melted against Ashken's presence. She pressed closer, whispering softly into the curve of Ashken's neck, letting words of longing, gratitude, and need escape in a rush of quiet confessions. Ashken shivered at the honesty, leaning in to capture each whisper, each fragile admission. "I see you," she said. "All of you. And I want all of this. With you." Shay closed her eyes, trembling at the weight of that acceptance. It was more than she'd allowed herself to hope for. More than she'd allowed herself to dream. Hands roamed with gentle reverence, exploring the sacred space they'd created together. Every brush of skin was a vow. Every sigh was a promise. Every heartbeat was a thread, weaving them together in intimacy deeper than either had dared imagine. Time ceased to exist. There was no outside world. No codes, no danger, no past betrayals, only the quiet surrender of two souls, letting each other in fully, trusting completely. Shay rested her forehead against Ashken's, exhaling softly. "I never knew it could feel like this," she whispered. "It's because we're holding it together," Ashken replied, lips brushing Shay's temple. "And we're holding each other." And in that still, sacred space, they did. Not as colleagues. Not as codebreakers. Not as survivors of past hurts. But as two people, open, vulnerable, and unafraid to let love in. The record hummed on, spinning their sanctuary into the night, and for the first time in their lives, both of them felt entirely, irrevocably, home. Chapter 30. Total Surrender. The apartment seemed to breathe with them, the vinyl spinning softly as if keeping time with the rhythm of their hearts. Ashken and Shay lay close, bodies pressed together, skin warm against skin, the quiet intimacy between them a sacred flame. Shay's fingers traced every line of Ashken's body, memorizing the curve of her shoulders, the subtle strength in her arms, the softness in places she'd never allowed anyone to see. Ashken mirrored the motion, fingertips mapping Shay's back, her spine, the hollows and peaks that made her uniquely herself. Every brush of lips, every whispered murmur, every tremor of touch built on the last, until restraint no longer existed. I'm yours, Shay whispered, voice trembling, soft, but full of certainty. Completely. Ashken pressed a feather-like kiss to her forehead, then deepened it to her lips, a slow, consuming connection that drew them together like gravity. And I'm yours, she replied. Always. Hands and lips explored freely, reverently, celebrating one another in a dance of desire and trust. Soft moans and quiet laughter mingled with the hum of the record, a soundtrack to their complete surrender. Clothes fell away, leaving only the bare, open truth of them. Skin against skin, hearts beating in tandem, breaths mingling and labored. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered name became a vow, a promise, a confession beyond words. Shay let go entirely every fear, every guarded brick she'd built, every shadow of past betrayals. Ashken received her fully, cradling her, holding her, letting her know in every movement, every sigh, every kiss that she was safe, cherished, and wanted in ways Shay had never imagined. Time stretched and folded around them. The outside world, the codes, the danger, all of it disappeared. There was only this moment, only this connection, only each other. They moved together slowly, deliberately, tenderly, exploring the fullness of what it meant to be completely known and completely desired. Every touch sparked, every kiss ignited, and every heartbeat became a language only they spoke. When the night finally gave way to exhaustion, they lay tangled, naked and sated, hearts and bodies still humming from the intensity of their union. Shay rested her head against Ashken's chest, listening to the steady beat, feeling the rise and fall of her breath. Ashken brushed a hand through Shay's hair, a soft smile against her temple. "You're home," she murmured. "I am," Shay whispered back, eyes closed, finally allowing herself the peace she had spent so long denying. And in the quiet aftermath, wrapped in warmth, touch, and love, they drifted together, utterly, irrevocably, spent. Chapter 31. Morning Light. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the apartment, threading through the blinds and landing softly on two bodies tangled in a cocoon of warmth. Ashken stirred, eyelids fluttering open to find Shay curled against her chest, head resting on her shoulder, hair brushing across her collarbone. A soft smile curved Ashken's lips. She lowered a hand to brush a stray lock of hair from Shay's face, fingertips grazing skin, slow, deliberate, almost reverent. Shay stirred, half awake, blinking up at Ashken, eyes still heavy with sleep and remnants of the night's passion. A faint, shy smile appeared as recognition and comfort settled in. "Morning," she whispered, voice husky, barely more than a breath. Ashken's thumb traced small circles over Shay's arm. "Morning," she murmured back. "Sleep well." Shay let out a soft laugh, a sound light and warm. "The best night's sleep I've had in forever." She shifted slightly, pressing closer, letting the intimacy linger, soaking in the warmth, the scent, the heartbeat beneath her ear. Ashken's lips found the top of Shay's head in a feather-like kiss. "I don't think anyone's ever made me feel like this," she admitted, voice low, almost confessional. "Safe. Seen. Wanted." Shay nuzzled closer, heart pounding. "Neither have I," she whispered, eyes closing again, savoring the feeling. "I don't want to get up." Ashken chuckled softly, brushing fingers along Shay's back, tracing the curve of her spine, memorizing every inch of her. "Then don't," she said. "Not yet. Just stay here with me. Let's linger." For a long moment, they did. No words, no urgency, just quiet breaths, slow touches, gentle murmurs, and the steady rhythm of two hearts entwined. Fingers intertwined under the soft sheets, hands brushing arms and shoulders, tentative kisses tracing the edge of lips and jawlines. Shay's fingers finally curled around Ashken's hand, bringing it to her cheek. I think I could get used to this," she murmured, voice soft and intimate. Ashken smiled, pressing a tender kiss to Shay's forehead. "Then we'll take it slow. No rush. No expectations. Just this. Us. Outside, the city woke, oblivious to the sanctuary inside. But here, in the quiet morning, in the soft light, wrapped in warmth and trust, Ashken and Shay let themselves simply be, together, unguarded, and entirely present. Shay tilted her head, brushing lips against Ashken's shoulder in a soft, lingering kiss. Ashken responded with a sigh, letting herself melt into the moment. The world could wait. Danger, codes, killers, they could wait. For now, there was only morning light, shared warmth, and the fragile, perfect intimacy of two hearts learning to trust completely. Chapter 32. Slow Day of Teasing. Sunlight spilled fully into the apartment now, warming the sheets and the skin beneath them. Shay stirred first, blinking against the light, Ashken still wrapped loosely around her. A mischievous grin tugged at her lips as she stretched languidly, brushing her fingers along Ashken's arm. Ashken groaned softly, eyes half-lidded, but didn't move. Shay's fingers traced small patterns along her shoulder, teasing, playful. Morning, Shay whispered, voice lilting with teasing warmth. Ashken's lips twitched into a smile, one eye opening just enough to glare, mock solemn. You're insufferable, she murmured. You love it, Shay countered, pressing a soft kiss to the curve of her shoulder. Ashken shivered at the contact, sighing softly. They untangled slowly, bodies brushing in the process, reluctant to release the heat of the night before. Shay padded to the kitchen in socks, hair falling over her face, and began rummaging through the cupboards with exaggerated care. What are you doing? Ashken called, following in bare feet, voice soft but amused. Breakfast, Shay said, voice muffled behind a spoonful of cereal. She turned suddenly, a smirk on her face. Unless you want to help, of course. Or, unless you want to distract me. Ashken stepped closer, brushing the back of her hand against Shay's as she passed. I think distraction is my specialty, she said, leaning close, letting her lips hover just above Shay's ear. Shay froze, a heat creeping over her as the touch lingered, teasing. MHM, dangerous, she murmured, half laughing, half breathless. The morning stretched with small, intimate rituals. Sharing a coffee, each stealing sips from the other's cup with mock complaints. Fingers brushing as they reached for utensils, sparks of connection in each accidental touch. Soft laughter at Shay's terrible attempts to cook scrambled eggs perfectly, Ashken hovering over her, hands guiding without fully taking control. Whispered teasing under the table, lips grazing shoulders, necks, and hands finding each other under the pretense of reaching for something mundane. By mid-afternoon, they had migrated back to the couch, surrounded by vinyl. Shay pulled out a record, placing it on the player, the needle landing with that familiar soft crackle. Ashken leaned into her, letting her head rest on Shay's shoulder as Shay hummed along quietly. I never thought someone could make me feel this comfortable, Ashken murmured. Fingers traced the small of Shay's back, tender and deliberate. Shay tilted her head, letting her lips brush Ashken's temple. It's easy when the other person doesn't fight it, she whispered back. The rest of the day melted into slow, teasing touches, soft kisses, quiet confessions, and playful smiles. Every brush of skin, every shared laugh, every glance carried intimacy deeper than words ever could. By evening, they were still wrapped around each other, bodies and hearts aligned, savoring the lingering warmth, the shared space, and the unspoken understanding that this day, this slow, teasing, tender day, was theirs alone. Epilogue, months later, rhythm of two hearts. The morning light spilled generously into the spacious apartment, glinting off the polished wooden floors and the neat rows of vinyl lining the shelves. Ashken moved through the kitchen in comfortable silence, the hum of the coffee machine and the soft playlist filling the space between them. Shay appeared in the doorway, hair mussed from sleep, combat boots in hand, wearing one of Ashken's oversized sweaters. Her eyes crinkled with that familiar mischievous warmth. You make it impossible to leave this bed, she teased, leaning against the doorframe. Ashken smirked, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. And yet you still do it. Every day. She handed Shay a mug, fingers brushing briefly, an electric touch that had become their morning ritual. They moved through the apartment like a well-practiced dance. Shay unpacked the records she had brought, lining them carefully in the spaces Ashken had carved for her collection. Ashken adjusted the needle on the antique record player, the soft crackle filling the room. "Look at us," Shay murmured, her voice soft with awe. "Yumi, a rhythm. Together." Ashken's storm-gray eyes softened as she took Shay's hand, holding it like a promise. "I never thought I'd feel this. Grounded. Safe. Loved. And yet, here we are." Shay leaned into her touch, resting her forehead against Ashken's shoulder. "I trust you," she whispered, completely. "I've never felt that before. Not like this." Ashken pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, letting it linger. "And I promise, I'll earn that trust every single day." For a moment, they simply stood there, hands intertwined, bodies brushing, hearts aligned. Their life had slowed into a rhythm, simple, steady, but infused with intimacy, laughter, teasing, whispered confessions, and quiet passion. Later, Shay curled up on the couch with a record spinning softly, Ashken draped beside her, fingers brushing lightly over hers. They shared soft, knowing smiles, a gentle kiss here, a whispered word there, a world of trust and desire woven into each gesture. Danger, codes, killers, all of it belonged to the past. What remained was theirs, a sanctuary of warmth, vinyl, soft light, teasing touches, and the quiet knowledge that they had built something unshakable together. Ashken tilted her head, brushing lips against Shay's temple. "Home," she murmured. Shay smiled, a soft, sleepy curl of lips. "Home," she echoed. And in that light, that rhythm, that sanctuary, they simply were, two hearts, intertwined, at peace, and utterly, irrevocably, together. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and like this video and follow me for more stories. You are always welcome here, and leave me a comment or a thumbs up, just letting me know if you like the story and would like more, or is there perhaps an idea that you would like to share or let me write for you.